check. It was terror for them, because they'd never had to survive economically at an individual level. And that generation just sort of died off as a gangster capitalism came in, because they had no lead-up time. That's the great tragedy of Russian destiny, that every system's been imposed in a slab-sided and ferocious way with no softening of the edges. One sort of plate has replaced another one, just as Marx wanted. Not the idea of gradual reform, the Blairs and Browns of this world, but total, utter, transfiguring change, which will completely revolutionise the nature of man. One point which is never dwelt upon, and there's an enormous amount of work on communism now, because it's so much in the past, people can sort of debate its details openly. The Jewish nature of communism, that is never ever discussed, and indeed is completely off limits in nearly all academic discourse. The truth is that nearly always half of the major core intellectuals in all communist groups are Jews or partly Jews. Nearly all the half of the Central Committee or the Executive Council, the Revolutionary Vanguard or whatever it calls itself is. The rest is made up of Bohemian, revolutionary Gentiles who are totally hate-filled and sparing and hostile to their own society. And it's a medley of these two groups, essentially. Outsider, insider groups to tear it down in the name of love, of course, in the name of love. But as you tear it down, you can catapult yourself from the fringe to the centre. And it's sort of, it's the Jerry Healy speech. You know, in the Workers' Revolutionary Party of the past, the most fanatical Marxist-Leninist group, probably, in British post-war history. There's others. There's Tariq Ali's International Marxist Group. The various incarnations of the Trotskyist tradition, which began in the 30s with the Balham Group in South London of the Communist Party of Great Britain, and then grew up as a separate tendency. One of the things that is, of course, interesting is that when they were more powerful 30 years ago, and they had known, if they had known of this meeting, there will be a riot outside, not just a bit of pushing and shoving, but an absolute riot. The pathological hatred of the radical right by the Trotskyist Marxist-Leninist left needs to be looked at, and there's several reasons for this. Partly they are the most committed to international revolution. They are the most committed to the idea that we have no groups. One race, the human race. One race, the human race, and those who doubt it go under. Reactionaries who can't be brooked, whose ideas are a menace to humanity. Because you know, the ideas are important for these people. It's not just, oh, you've got an idea. You know, two English intellectuals, you've got an idea, I have an idea. It's cricket. You know, we debate, one wins, the other loses, we draw, we embrace. No, ideas are life and death. And are the basis of struggle and meaning. You see, because meaning for them is in their praxis, they call it, the moment of achieved struggle and recognition of truth in ideology. A Marxist intellectual called Malcolm Evans, who's a Marxist deconstructionist, he told me, with extreme pride. I said, so you believe in the complete destruction of all Western cultural norms and the replacement of it by a foreign ideology? And he said, you're only saying that to me because you're a bourgeois reactionary of the most hateful sort. Because he once said to me, the bourgeois goes to life with common sense, the Marxist with his theory. Theory is truth. And I said, and you'll put to death those who don't agree with your theory? He said, you're putting words in my mouth. But the irony is that these people who believed in this current of theory were near the top in nearly all of our universities between about 1930 and 1980 plus. Even in the United States. The University of Texas, can you imagine a more redneck state than Texas? The University of Texas's economic department was Marxist. This is the state of the Bushes and so on. They had achieved an ascendancy in parts of the academic world, part of the mental thinking within the Western society, which is difficult for many people to understand. And conservatism was so weak in these institutions, and when it was terrorised by Trotskyist mobs as well, it virtually disappeared. You know, I knew a chap who was head of sociology at the Polytechnic of North London for a period, an Irish chap. He was just a conservative, really, a right-wing conservative, O'Keefe, I think his name was. And every term he moved his office, because there would be a brick from the socialist workers through the window, but he knew it was coming. And I said to him, why did you put up with it? You know, and he said, well, why should I give in to these people, and that sort of thing. So he had a little bit of spirit, but for everyone like him, 100 gave up. 100 went along with it, 100 resigned, they sort of went into internal exile within their own institutions. And don't forget, we're just talking about conservatives. We're talking about people who are well to the left of almost anyone here. So if they haven't got a chance, what do you think these, the sort of opinions that are canvassed by this group has? Because since the Second World War, the sort of opinions that this group deals with have been outlawed in all institutions of higher education. I once addressed a BNP meeting, and a bloke put up his hand and said, "You've swallowed a dictionary, mate, haven't you? What's it all about then?" And I said, "Look, I'm putting forward ideas to you which have been banned in the auditoriums where they should be heard for 60 years. They go, "Oh, fair play, mate, you know." But there's a degree to which that's what this group really is for. Because the reason we have the society that we have is due to large-scale economic and cultural forces, admittedly to a degree, but it's also due to the mindset that accepts them before they physically happen. Now, Marxism, in a sense, advocates two contradictory things, but it believes in contradiction held together in struggle. It believes everything's economically determined, and yet if you theorise about the way in which it's determined enough, you can actually change the nature of the determination. There was a theorist called Gramsci at the beginning of the 20th century, who's in the Italian Communist Party ranks, who split the idea of the superstructure, culture, society, the arts, intellect, media, from the base, economics. Then Marxism can go completely cultural and just swim around, not linked to proletarian movements, not linked to trade union politics, not linked to working class political struggle as defined by the far left. Marx was quite funny about the working class actually, because he said, when I meet these German trade unionists, I like them less. He said, because they were stroppy individuals who'd contradict Professor Marx, as he insisted on being called, because don't forget, he was giving the proles their theory. The structural relationship between the intellectual master and the working class followers was quite apparent. And Marx fancied himself as a politician, not just a theorist, because he founded a group called the International Working Men's Association, which is the first international. Communists talk about internationals, first, second, third, fourth. The Trotskyist one's the fourth. Tiny little Trotskyist sort of four men in a kiosk groups would struggle about which one represented the fourth international, which was out in Mexico, because of course a Stalinist agent killed Trotsky by penetrating his brain with an ice pick through the skull. Louis Mercador, I think his name was, and he crept into his study and stabbed him through the skull. And the sort of anarchists to this day wear t-shirts saying "Ice pick a trot," because they, you know, anarchists just love being offensive to everyone, even on their own side. And as the spike penetrated his brain, Trotsky's last words were a hysterical Ashkenazi shriek in which he said, "You've been sent by him, namely Stalin." And he had. And he had, that's, you know. He went out in the light and in the dark, one could say. So, I once had a walk round these areas where they have these plaques, you know, these blue plaques, and if somebody famous lived in the house, there's a white writing. And I was with a right-wing intellectual called Bill Hopkins at the time, and we looked up at this house where Engels had lived. Friedrich Engels, it said in the dates. Economic theorist. That's a bit tame, isn't it? Economic theorist. I thought, well, you have to consider in the percussion of ideology, as Nietzsche said, the idea has an effect after the stone is thrown. Consider the destructive impact these individuals and their ideas have had on our civilization. An economic theorist doesn't cut it, does it? Perhaps you could scrub that out and say the destroyer of a world. The destroyer of a world. And that's largely what Marxist-Leninism ideology amounted to, the destruction of the norms of pre-existent Western civilization, done in its name, done as the revolutionary detritus brought to power by tame theorists and political criminals who saw their way to a main chance. And it's dominated the thinking of our peoples in one form or another to such a degree that if you meet somebody in the arts now who's a fluffy liberal, that they say, oh, all races are equal, all men are equal, anyone who says other is a reactionary beast, I'm for aid to Africa, I'm for saving the planet, they are mouthing the 10th rate approximation to this theory. The hardcore theory would appall them. 10 stages back, Fanon saying whites should be killed because they incarnate the guilt of oppressive imperialist capitalist classes, which is based on Lenin's book.